Well, good evening. So you might have noticed a few things that are a little bit different. One is that I'm sitting at my desk instead of over in front of the altar, and another is that it's daytime. So normally, I do these at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays, but this particular Wednesday, I have to be at Stetson, or at least I have to be online for an event for Stetson. We're doing a vigil for COVID-19. And so I have to be there. So I am pre-recording this. So since I'm doing it this way, I'm going to do something a little bit kind of different, a little creative. I'm going to do an incense offering the way I ordinarily do. And then I'm going to sort of take you with me to White Sands Buddhist Center just a little bit. I'm going to skip the guided meditation. The Wednesday night services are all on YouTube, so if you miss that, you can go and do a rerun, I guess you could say. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you about something that might surprise you a little bit. So let's go ahead and do this incense offering. Three bows. The fragrance of this incense invites the awakened mind to be present with us now. The fragrance of this incense fills our room, protects and guards our minds from wrong thinking. The fragrance of this incense unites us with precepts, concentration, and insight. We offer it for all beings. So now I'm going to bring you to White Sands Buddhist Center for a little while, and we can chant the Metta Sutra together there. I've been missing the sound of the voices chanting together, so I thought I would share this with you tonight. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. So, on June 25th, 1967, 53 years ago tomorrow, the Beatles performed All You Need Is Love live for the first and only time. The performance included a 13-piece orchestra, members of the Rolling Stones, The Who, Eric Clapton, and other friends from the entertainment world. And the song was aired as the closing segment of a live television special, Our World, which was seen around the globe via satellite. This was the first live event to be televised globally. So I'm going to put a link here on the video so that you can, if you want to, you can go and watch that. It's on YouTube, so you can go and see it on YouTube. And then if you'd like to, you can go and watch that, and then you can come back here and watch the rest of this talk, or you can check it out later, whatever you want to do. Anyway, this was a very important moment in our culture. A few years earlier, Marshall McLuhan had used the term global village to describe how electronic technology had turned the globe into a small town, basically, by making possible the instantaneous movement of information to from one point to every other point. And here was that, on that particular broadcast, represented very dramatically. Virtually the entire world gathered around their television sets that day to see cattle ranching in Canada, and to hear Maria Callas singing opera and watch Pablo Picasso paint, and all with the same immediacy as if they were sitting around a campfire listening to folk tales. So, you know, today that's very simple. I mean, we can be together virtually from anywhere in the world all at the same time, but then it was a big deal. So the message the Beatles sent from London to conclude the broadcast was a very simple message of universal love. John Lennon had written the song, and for the most part, and he said later that he saw himself as a revolutionary. He said, "My art is dedicated to change." And so when he sang All You Need Is Love, he meant that love was the necessary ingredient in individual change and in social change. We can take a few lines out of context and that intention becomes a little bit more clear. He wrote, "There's nothing you can do that can't be done. Nothing that you can make that can't be made. No one you can save that can't be saved. Nothing you can know that isn't known. Nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be you. All you need is love." This wasn't the first time that the Beatles presented the idea of love as a catalyst for transformation. A couple of years earlier, during the recording sessions for Rubber Soul, Lennon and McCartney wrote The Word, which said, "Everywhere I go, I hear it said, in the good and bad books that I have read, say the word and you'll be free. Say the word I'm thinking of. Have you heard? The word is love." But this satellite broadcast, along with a number of other events that happened that summer, had significant long-term effects on our culture. It was kind of the beginning of the Summer of Love, which largely centered on San Francisco, at least in the U.S. Thousands of young people came to San Francisco to experiment with new forms of independent thought and creativity. In the UK, London experienced something similar to what was going on in San Francisco. But change rippled through the world from those sources. The effect wasn't just on art and music, but on lifestyle and on the accepted social fabric. So in San Francisco and elsewhere, there were love-ins, and political power was predicted to be replaced with flower power. It seems so naive now, but at the time, this was a big deal. And the gray flannel and concrete block world of the status quo would be supplanted by the colorful, organic beauty of love and freedom. Another anthem from the era suggested, if you're going to San Francisco, there was no need for a suit and tie, put a flower in your hair instead. So I was too young to do any of that, but I visited Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, that district where all that stuff happened, when I went to California to the Bright Dawn Center. And visiting Bright Dawn was like a pilgrimage, but it felt like another one to stand at the corner of Haight Street and Ashbury. Anyway, I was very young in 1967. I was only 11 years old, but I can track the era's effects on my own life pretty directly. And the Beatles were a big factor in that. Were it not for them, I probably wouldn't be a Buddhist. You're going to find this ironic. but I had a fascination with Billy Graham when I was young, and that's probably what led me to being a religious teacher. But if George Harrison hadn't gone to India, I might still be a Baptist. The Beatles, especially Harrison, developed a fascination with Indian music while filming a scene in Help. There was a scene in a restaurant where Indian musicians were performing, and they found it very interesting. Harrison picked up a sitar and started playing around with it, and he later bought one and brought it into the studio, and it started showing up on songs like Norwegian Wood. In '66, he decided to study Indian music formally, and he started out by spending 6 weeks in India taking sitar lessons from Ravi Shankar, which, to put that in perspective, it would be like deciding you wanted to learn how to play the cello, and so you go spend 6 weeks with Yo-Yo Ma. During his stay in India, Shankar introduced Harrison to his guru, and so this interest in Indian music expanded into an interest in Indian religion. And he brought that interest back to the Beatles. So in August 1967, the Beatles met the Maharshi Mahesh Yogi at a lecture in London, and eventually ended up at his retreat center in India learning transcendental meditation. So I had gotten my first guitar when I was about 9 years old. My career plan at the time was to be the fifth Beatle when I grew up, and that obviously didn't work out. But I felt like I needed to stay in the loop. So when the Beatles started talking about meditation, I figured I'd best learn how to meditate. And I started out by doing things like sitting cross-legged on the floor listening to Harrison's song, The Inner Light. And I managed to find some books about meditation, yoga, and Eastern religion, and started trying to cobble together a practice based on what I could find. And so here we are. There's probably a lot of stories like mine. The period around '67 was a time of great change in our culture and affected a lot of people similarly. So, interestingly enough, a lot of the love part of that summer came in reaction to its opposite. The war in Vietnam was reaching peak activity. The civil rights movement had at times led to violence. In fact, the Summer of Love coincided with what has also been called the Long Hot Summer. There were 159 what was referred to then as race riots that summer. We'd just call them demonstrations, civil rights demonstrations now, I guess. But anyway, I started thinking about the Summer of Love again recently in light of a lot of what's going on politically now and Black Lives Matter protests and that sort of thing. And I think this summer is very significant too. It's very different, but it's almost certain that it will become the catalyst for a lot of changes. There's this weird global village effect happening because of so many things going remote. We have people joining our little Buddhist community now listening to talks like this one who couldn't possibly have attended our services not too long ago. And I think that the protests now are going to have a major positive effect over the long term. This fall may look really rocky because of the politics, but I think that this is one of those times of really great change that we're going to look back on some years from now and realize that this summer was a point where everything changed. So in '67, there was, amid all this chaos and destruction, the Flower Power movement was born, and the Beatles came out singing All You Need Is Love. And thinking about this, I started wondering, all you need is love. Is that true? So love is a very important concept in most religions. The Bible says anyone who does not love does not know God because God is love. I'm not an expert on Christianity, but that was one that came to me pretty quickly. In the first sermon ever given by the Prophet Muhammad in Medina, he said, "Let the Spirit of Allah be the source of love between you." In Buddhism, the discourse most often quoted regarding the importance of love is the Metta Sutta, which you just heard recited from White Sands, where the Buddha practically equates love with enlightenment itself. He says this is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Then he outlines this practice of loving all beings as both the path to awakening and as the inevitable result of awakening. So what is it? What is love? I guess when we talk about love in most contexts, we mean romantic love. As I said, what is love? I almost said, what is this thing called love? And it reminded me that there's an old song that's basically, that's the title. What is this thing called love? There's a very funny Benny Hill sketch involving that. But anyway, I have digressed. I guess when we talk about love in most contexts, though, that's what we mean. The love of most love songs is attraction. Anybody can say I love you when they really mean I think you're hot or you fit in pretty well with my lifestyle. You know, that kind of love, though, diminishes fairly quickly or becomes self-serving, can turn into attachment in destructive ways. So we could say that that's not the kind of real love that we're talking about. There's a passage in the Bible that you've probably heard someone read at a wedding. I've read it myself at weddings, even though it's not my tradition. Then it's a good description of authentic love. Love is patient, kind, does not envy, does not boast, is not proud, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. That's from 1 Corinthians 13. So real love, in that sense, is pretty deep stuff, and it isn't as easy as just falling into it. As the Buddha said, loving is for one who is skilled in goodness. It's a skill, and who knows the path of peace. So if love is a skill, how would you reflect that? How would you reflect a sort of love that is patient and kind, isn't rude, rejoices in truth, never fails? And Buddhism has a prescription for that in the form of what we call the boundless states or the divine abodes. And this is love in its highest form. And it's a four-part process for developing states of mind that I think truly embody what we might consider authentic love for other beings. So I mentioned the Metta Sutra where the Buddha talks about cultivating the skill of love as a path to awakening. So metta is the first of these states. It's a middle state that arises from this thought as expressed in that discourse. Wishing in gladness and safety may all beings be at ease. In other words, may all beings be happy, be safe, be free from stress and affliction. That's the beginning of this authentic, deeper love, to recognize the value of true happiness for yourself and others. But loving doesn't just mean wanting someone to be happy. And so there's this second process, compassion. If you're compassionate, you want the other to be free from suffering, and you're willing to be a part of that. So you could say that's reflected in the biblical passage about love, always trusting, hoping, and persevering. Even when the other person is difficult, you can still want to protect them from harm and not contribute to their suffering. In the Metta Sutta, there's the passage, even as a mother protects with her life her only child, so should one cherish all living beings. So if we're serious about love, then we're serious about looking out for others, even when we may not like what they're doing. We can still love them in that way. So third, love includes gladness about the good fortune of others. It means that we're grateful when we recognize what has benefited us, and we should be equally grateful when we see another's good fortune. So this precludes envy and jealousy and the sort of self-seeking aspect of what some people might call romantic love. And lastly, authentic love recognizes and accepts that others are not bound by our preferences for them, and that they're subject to the vagaries of impermanence and not self, just as we are. So with this equanimity, we don't expect others to love us back or to be there for us forever. We miss them when life takes them in other directions and when life comes to an end, but we understand that all beings rise, fall, and otherwise change due to causes and conditions, including their own actions. So we have to let them carry out their own karma. So we can love fully. We don't need to hold back because we worry about loss and change. We don't hold on to unrealistic expectations. Equanimity allows us to persevere because we accept difficulties. We can be patient. We keep no record of wrongs. It's also important to recognize that we are loved. It's hard to love others thoroughly if we don't recognize that we're supported. In Christianity, Islam, and so on, people talk about God's love. In Buddhism, we might associate the compassion we receive with bodhisattvas and Buddhas like Kuan Yin or Amitabha. These can be seen as objects of gratitude when we recognize how much support we get in life. But we can also make it a point just to recognize how others, humans, animals, objects, and so on, make our lives better and even make it possible for us to live and be grateful for that. So, I'm going to come back to the question, is it true that all you need is love? And I think love, in the way I've described it, can be an instrument of transformation. If we are loving truly and authentically and recognizing the love we receive, is that really all we need? I think it's an essential ingredient. I think it's also a little bit like saying all you need for an omelet is eggs. It's partly true. That's the one thing you definitely need. But you also need a pan of some kind and a source of heat. Otherwise, you just have raw eggs. We won't get a lot done if we just sit around thinking loving thoughts beyond making ourselves feel a little bit better, maybe. To really do something with love, to make something with love, to save someone, to know something, learn how to be you, as Lennon put it. We need a little bit more than love. We have to put love to use in skillful ways, and for that we need wisdom and we need effort. Wisdom can remind us to love even when we don't want to, can remind us to bring compassion and gladness and equanimity to the process, can also help us know when a passionate feeling will help us to help others and when it will distract from that. Effort can keep us from doing instead of just feeling, or keep us doing instead of just feeling. It will enable us to direct the flow of love so that we accomplish what wisdom tells us is important. So that's what it means, I think, to put love into practice. And as a result of doing that, we get to enjoy more love. You know, a few years later, the Beatles said something like, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And that's the nice thing about really loving. The more you give, the more you have. So I mentioned earlier that the summer of love came along at a time of great change. And much of that change was accompanied by chaos and discord. And I think it's possible that love helped carry us through that. If anger and resentment were all we had had during those years, I think we'd be looking back on a much darker picture. But even those among us to whom this is a history lesson and not a memory can look back on the summer of love with some gladness. There were seeds planted then that have ripened in ways that many of us could hardly imagine at the time would become realities in our lifetime. We still have a lot of work to do toward true social justice and real equality, of course. We still have wars, but I think our cultural attitude toward war went through a dramatic shift. We may still see war as a necessity sometimes, but you know, there hasn't been forced conscription, the draft, in this country since 1973. And I think about things like same-sex marriage and medical marijuana and recreational marijuana in some places. And in 1967, something like that would have been just a pipe dream. No pun intended. So even when it seemed we were immersed in evil, love carried us toward good. And it can still do that as long as we remind ourselves that what we really need is love. So I mentioned that I've been to the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco, and it's pretty much a tourist destination now, more that than a center of cultural change. But that doesn't mean that we can't have our own summer of love. Put a flower in your hair if you want to, and go to the San Francisco in your heart. So by way of closing, I'd like to offer you these thoughts. As we move forward from this moment, may we do so with hearts filled with love. May we remember we all walk the same earth. May we remember we are one under the blue sky. May we treat our relationships as sacred and our words as scripture. We surround all people in other forms of life with the infinite light of wisdom and compassion. Particularly, we send loving thoughts to all those in suffering and sorrow, all those in doubt and confusion, and all those seeking spiritual peace. By virtue of wisdom and compassion, may we realize the unexcelled value of our human existence. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.